Right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we do have our session running. Right now, we've been joined in the studio by someone who was here yesterday as well. And looking forward to hearing him right here live from where I'm standing. And he's going to be joined by another expert. Let me tell you a little about them. So Kalsoom Lakhani, who's going to be joining us online, is the co-founder and general partner of Invest to Innovate, which supports startups and the broader entrepreneurship ecosystem in growth markets. While Mubariz, who was here with us yesterday, he's the general counsel at Sarmayakar, Pakistan's leading venture capital firm, where he heads all transactional and structuring matters. And he's here in the studio with us right now. They're going to be talking about how to invest in Pakistan. And this is going to be pretty interesting because that's something we all want to hear. How does one really invest in this country? What will it be like? How safe it is, etc., etc. So let's take it over to Mubariz right here in the studio, and Kalsoom will join us online.
Hey, Mubariz, and we're live, right?
Yeah, we're live.
Okay, awesome. Hi, everybody. So nice to see everybody. And it's been so much fun over the last 2 days. I've been pretty active in the chat and attending all the panels. So really grateful to 021Disrupt and the Nest.io team for what they've put together. Mubariz and I are doing and releasing a really cool guide today. I'm actually going to share my screen so we can get started. Hold on. Hopefully this works. And hopefully my computer does not shut down in the process. Can you guys see my screen? Hold on. Just 1 second. Okay, just give me 1 sec. Hold on. Sorry. All right. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Can you guys see us?
Can see it now.
Okay, great. So first, before we start, I thought it would be kind of a good idea for those who don't know who we are to get a chance to meet Mubariz and I. And rather than us kind of doing our own dry introductions, I thought it would be kind of fun since Mubariz and I are friends, as well as obviously our funds are collaborating on this guide today. We thought it would be more fun if we introduced each other. So Mubariz, do you want to introduce me?
Yeah, of course. So Kalsoom is someone who started I2I before Tahir Shah came up with the song. So it's really that old. So you know, we can also forgive her for the name. But she's been someone who's been around in the industry for, I mean, definitely before I was. And I want to say 7-8 years is when she first took a bet on entrepreneurs in Pakistan, their potential businesses in Pakistan, connecting them with the resources that they need to build. And Nest.io, where I am sitting right now, is the place where Kalsoom and I met, I think 4 or 5 years ago. And I'm just so proud to see how much she has grown in that time and how much I2I has grown in that time. From a leading accelerator, they've also now started a fund, which Kalsoom has transitioned into as the CEO of I2I. From the CEO of I2I, the accelerator, she's now fully focused on the fund. So really happy to be introducing my friend Kalsoom, and really proud of what she's achieved over the past few years.
Yeah, thanks, Mubariz. And I'm excited to introduce my friend Mubariz, who, as you mentioned, we've known each other for a few years. I like to consider him a fellow partner in crime in the ecosystem, someone, and also a gossip partner. I feel like we chat a lot about a lot of things that are going on constantly around us. Mubariz is obviously most well known as the general counsel of Sarmayakar, but for those who've been part of the startup ecosystem, he's actually been like such a player in this space as a startup lawyer for so many companies on the startup side as well, who've really and has really been there and seen firsthand so many things that have gone wrong, as well as helped make things go right, and a really strong advocate on the legal side for what we're seeing happen in the ecosystem so positively right now. So proud to be your friend, Mubariz, and so excited that we did this together. And I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about why we decided to do this. So the Early Stage Investors Guide to Pakistan, which we're releasing today, we'll give you guys a link at the end of this, and the Nest.io team will be sending out a link to it as well. The Early Stage Investors Guide to Pakistan was something that we really felt strongly on the part of Sarmayakar, which Mubariz is representing today, and IDI Ventures, which, as Mubariz mentioned, is the fund that I co-founded with my partner, Misbah Naqvi. And for us, as two funds operating in the market, what we really felt was important was to actually say, how do we actually encourage others to invest into Pakistan? And for Mubariz, like, why did you think it was so important for us to do this?
Well, because what I'm seeing is, as more and more interest in Pakistani companies is materializing, I'm seeing a lot of individuals who are abroad and a lot of small non-institutional investors who are abroad and have developed an interest in one startup or the other. And I feel like a lot of those check sizes are still relatively small, and going and engaging a law firm or lawyers can be a bit daunting. And in some cases, it's either leading to mistakes by the investor or the founder, or it's either leading to the investors having to pay a significant amount for a deal that should actually be very smooth. So I think the point of this guide is to serve as some sort of not to replace legal advice, of course, and not to replace legal services when you're drafting your documentation, but to give you a good sense of how you should be thinking about this investment. What are the considerations that you should have in mind? And yeah, so I think that's the main goal.
That's the premise for us. And I think for those of you guys who've been attending, 021 Disrupt, even for the last few years, if this is your first time, as you probably have seen firsthand, the entrepreneurship ecosystem in Pakistan has grown so significantly, right? So over the last 5 years, startups in Pakistan have raised over $200 million. And the most interesting and exciting part of that is about half of that amount of money has happened in the last 2 years alone, right? So what we're seeing is a tremendous interest in Pakistan, a tremendous amount of activity that's happening. And on a regular basis, as Mubariz mentioned, we are constantly talking to and meeting a lot of investors who want to co-invest with us as funds, who are looking at other startups that we know and are looking at as well, and often just don't know how to invest, right? And those are the questions that we kept getting over and over again. Mubariz and I both, and our Misbah, my partner, I'm sure Sarmayakar gets that generally as well. We constantly get asked how to invest, right? And for me, what I think is really important, something that I'm so passionate about from an ecosystem perspective, is that we can't go at this alone, right? The ecosystem will not be built on one player. It won't even be built on one VC fund, right? We need to have more investors in order to encourage more startups and encourage the growth to continue to happen, right? And especially since the fact that this year, as of yesterday, with the Rumi announcement by Faisal at Lakhani VC, in 2020, the amount of money raised by Pakistani startups actually just surpassed what we raised in 2019, despite the fact that we're in the middle of a pandemic. And so it's also exciting right now, and we want to continue to encourage that growth, and we want to be able to address some of the mistakes that we've already seen happen in the past. So this guide is really geared towards a foreign or a local investor. It really takes you through the steps of investing when you download it. And if you're a startup founder that's listening to this and you have an investor that you're speaking to that's never invested before, or has never invested in Pakistan, send them this guide, right? We're going to walk you through how, before you invest, what you should think about, making your investment, getting your shares issued, how to manage your investment, and eventually, inshallah, how to exit your investment. But I think what's important is that Mubariz and I actually want to address some of the mistakes that we've seen happen, because obviously the guide in itself acts as that, but we want to be able to talk about the why, because based on the mistakes that we often see. So mistake number one is typically what we see is the investor hands over money to the founder, not to the entity. So Mubariz, can you share with us, share with the audience why that's such a problem in the first place?
Okay, so typically what happens is there are various forms of business organization that you can use to start a business, right? You can have a sole proprietorship, a partnership, You can have so an unincorporated entity, which basically means that all the assets of the business are still being owned by the founders or the founding individuals. And when you give money to individuals, you're not getting any equity in an entity which actually owns all these assets. So the first advice to any investor would be to invest, to make sure that the founders have set up an entity, make sure all the assets of the business belong to that entity, and then to make sure that you give money to that entity so that you have an investment there and you have a cause of action against that particular entity.
Thanks. Let's go to the next mistake. The big mistake number 2 that we typically see from investors that just don't know is that they leave the investment documentation for later. And by the way, the best part about this guide is that if anyone has been following us on Twitter as this guide was coming out, is that Mubariz is a lawyer, so oftentimes speaks in legal language, and I was kind of his translator, subtitle expert of like translating it into a dummy version of things that I could understand and hopefully you can understand as well. So Mubariz, can you explain in like 30 seconds, why is leaving the investment documentation for later a mistake that people don't want to make? And how is the guide helping them?
So basically, in most cases, people forget what they agreed to, right? You speak on the phone and you've had many conversations and someone remembers that the ESOP will be 10%. Someone remembers, no, we agreed to 7%, even though in the beginning we spoke about 10%. The point of documentation, the idea is to not slow down the investment process, to not slow down the execution for the company. But the idea is to make sure that you have recorded your understanding in no uncertain terms. It should be very clear. So even if, say, your documents are getting ready and the company has a really important opportunity, make sure whatever you've agreed on is at least in an email or in some sort of documentation form where you can look at. So the guide actually highlights the areas that you should also be sure to look at in your investment documentation. Also, I have written this little piece on term sheets and has various aspects that investors could consider. So if you want a quick guide on how those things work, you feel free to check that out as well.
Yeah. And subtitles from Mubariz, again, ESOP is employee stock options, basically, right? So it's providing the pool for people. So I will continue to be your subtitles, Mubariz, for those who may not know in the audience. Okay. Basically, and why that's also important, guys, and why the guide is important is because the legal and regulatory environment, though it's improving in Pakistan right now, we're actually in the top 30 economies worldwide that has the best minority protections for investors, but we're also 108 in doing business in the rankings, right? So there's still a lot of regulatory barriers and things that seem really tricky to understand. So the guide really tries to help dispel some of those issues so that you know what you have to do in order. What we don't want to have happen is an investor to put money into Pakistan and not be able to get their money out. Mubariz, this is a very legal sounding thing. So mistake number 3, they don't seek information rights. What does that mean? And I will be your subtitle again if I need to. Go ahead.
I'll also try to keep it simple. So information rights are basically the right investor has to seek information from the company. Now, statutory, like the law, the right that they give is annually the audited statement, etc. But if you are playing a more active role in the business, say you're not part of the board and if you haven't sought those rights, the problem that becomes is that the founders are no longer obligated to inform the investor of what the company is doing, how it's growing, and what the latest numbers are. So typically on a monthly or on a quarterly basis to seek management accounts and to seek regular monthly, quarterly updates, it's good practice for an investor. Even if you are a little hands-off, you still want to have the right to have that information as often as you want.
Yeah. And I think also, just as a quick aside too, I think the reason why explaining all of these things in a guide becomes really important is because something that I'm sure, Mubariz, we've both seen is that I've met a lot of investors as an investor and raising for our fund, but also raising for startups in the past that have been burned because they've not done some of these things, right? So they couldn't get their money out, or they didn't do this properly, or they weren't there, someone walked away with their money, right? And then the attitude is that we're never going to invest again. So for us, it's like, how do we keep the momentum going and make the startup ecosystem generally just continue to grow? right? And that's really the purpose of all of this. The last mistake that we're going to talk about today isn't actually something that the guide directly talks about, but it's something that comes up so much that we actually felt like it was really important, which is that mistake number 4 is that investors take too much equity. Mubariz, do you want to take a second and tell us why you think that's really important? And I'll also share some thoughts on that.
Yeah, your views as an investor are very important as well. But from a simple venture building perspective, what you need to understand is the whole thing, the whole continuum works because the founders are largely in control, and the equity given to the founders is actually substantial enough to keep them motivated in the long term. Now, when you take up too much in the first round or the first two rounds, there's not much that's keeping the founder in the business, right? Say Series B, the founder could just not want to be there because his stake is or her stake is not substantial enough. So simple as that. If you want the company, if it's a venture play which you see raising subsequent rounds of capital, it's very important for you to make sure that the founders have enough equity which can sustain dilution and yet remain an attractive proposition that keeps them at the company.
I saw this come up a lot in the chat too for 021Disrupt. And so I think what's important for us is that though the guide doesn't talk about equity issues in terms of it's not a commercial guide in that way, our hope is that as this guide hopefully inshallah encourages more investors to invest, it actually just creates more diversity from the investor space, right? So we want to be able to create more options for you guys so you don't feel like you have to settle for bad investors who want to take too much equity in your company. So for us, I'm also mindful of time and if in case there are questions that are coming up, but here is the link to download the guide. So Mayakar also has it on their website. Mina Bytes will also be posting it. You can download the guide directly. It's free. It's something that we worked really, really hard on and something that we're really excited to give to you guys today. And so just looking if we have any, thanks from Myra that we were both epic people in the startup space. Thanks, Myra. But thank you guys so much. And for us, if you have any questions, I mean, this guide, the purpose of it is it's going to be evolving, right? So Mubariz yesterday had a really great talk about the regulatory space, and that what we're seeing is that the regulatory environment in Pakistan is actually improving right now, right? In terms of the state bank, the SECP are actually really open to change. And there's some things that I think will be coming up that we'll try to add to the guide in the future as things change for investors that you want to speak to. Mubariz, any last words from you?
Yeah, just want to double down on what you just said. We will definitely be updating the guide soon because from what we know, and we have been part of these processes, we know that wholesome changes are coming, especially on the offshore structuring. Then there's changes, SECP's ordinance lapse, which introduced a lot of changes, but now that's going to be redone. SECP is coming up. Actually, that's different, but still, it's around crypto and how that will also be possible, hopefully soon enough. So there's a lot of exciting regulatory development on the horizon. So there will be some updates to this guide, and if offshore companies, etc., is what you're looking to set up, I would say wait up a little bit till the time the new laws come through, and then you can start structuring things that way.
Yeah. And feel free to tweet both of us if you have any other questions. Hopefully, we did a good job of subtitling all of this for you to make it easy to understand and to send to your investors that are looking at Pakistan. And if you're an investor, we hope this gives you all the information that you need and then some in order to make your decision properly.